The mysterious inheritance. Paul Foster's life was simple, just an ordinary Boston programmer living an ordinary life. But all that changed when an unexpected holographic message flickered into existence on his desk. The alien script twisted and morphed into English, a language far removed from the sender's native tongue. Zorak is dead. You are his heir. Come to Proxima B immediately. Paul's fingers hovered over the keyboard, his mind reeling. Zorak, his extraterrestrial pen pal of 5 years, was gone. And somehow, he, a mere human, was named the heir. It had to be some sort of elaborate prank. Yet, as the days passed and more messages arrived, authenticated by codes only he and Zorak knew, the reality began to sink in. This was no joke. It was real. 2 weeks later, Paul found himself aboard an interstellar transport, hurtling through the void of space toward Proxima Centauri. The journey was a blur of cryosleep and bewildering moments of consciousness, each one more surreal than the last. As the ship began its descent to Proxima B, Paul pressed his face against the viewport. The alien world loomed before him, a breathtaking tapestry of deep purples and swirling silver clouds. His heart raced. This was happening. He was about to step onto an alien planet for the first time. The ship touched down with a gentle thud, and Paul swallowed hard, adjusting his Earth-style suit. It was a poor fit for the alien atmosphere, but it was the best he could manage on short notice. The airlock hissed open, and he stepped out onto alien soil. A small welcoming party awaited him. 2 figures stood out immediately, their alien beauty taking his breath away. One, tall and lissom, with shimmering blue skin, regarded him with piercing silver eyes. The other, shorter, with iridescent scales and graceful tendrils framing her face, offered a warm smile that set him at ease. "Welcome, Paul Foster," the taller one said, her voice melodious yet tinged with an otherworldly resonance. "I am Azora, first wife of Zorak." "And I am Leah," the other added, her tone softer, almost musical, second wife of Zorak, "and now, along with my sister wife, your inheritance." Paul's jaw dropped. "I what? Wives?" Zorak never mentioned. Azora's eyes flashed with a hint of amusement. "There is much Zorak did not tell you, it seems. Come, we have much to discuss." They led him to a sleek vehicle that hovered silently above the ground. As they sped toward the city, Paul's mind whirled with questions. The landscape outside was alien, yet hauntingly beautiful, all twisting spires and floating gardens. "I don't understand," Paul finally managed. "Why would Zorak leave everything to me? We were friends, sure, but this is insane." Leah placed a gentle hand on his arm, sending an electric tingle through his body. "Zorak saw something in you, Paul, something special. He believed you could bridge our worlds." "But why me?" Paul insisted. "I'm just a programmer. I don't know anything about your world, your customs. I can't even breathe your air without help." Azora's gaze pierced him. "Perhaps that is precisely why." A fresh perspective, untainted by our complexities. The vehicle slowed as they approached a towering structure that seemed to defy gravity. Crystalline spires twisted upwards, connected by gossamer bridges that sparkled in the alien sunlight. "Welcome to your new home," Leia said softly. Paul stepped out, craning his neck to take in the full scope of the building. This is mine." "Ours," Azora corrected, a hint of challenge in her voice. "Remember, we are part of your inheritance as well." Paul flushed, unsure how to respond. "Look, about that. On Earth, we don't exactly." "We are aware of Earth customs," Leah interjected gently. "But you are no longer on Earth, Paul Foster. Here, you must learn new ways." They entered the building and Paul gasped. The interior was a marvel of alien architecture and technology. Holographic displays flickered to life as they passed, showing data streams he couldn't begin to comprehend. This was Zorak's primary residence, Azora explained, and his main research facility. The work he was doing here, it could change everything. Research? Paul asked. What kind of research? Leah and Azora exchanged a glance. That, Leah said carefully, is a conversation for another time. For now, you must rest. The journey has been long, and there is much to absorb. They showed him to a spacious room with a view that took in the alien cityscape. As Paul sank onto a bed that seemed to mold itself to his body, his heart began to race. This was not just an inheritance. This was integration, becoming part of their world in the most intimate way possible. He had no idea what lay ahead, but one thing was certain: his life would never be the same again. The ritual of integration. The next morning, Paul woke to the soft hum of alien technology. Sunlight streamed through the crystalline windows, casting rainbow patterns across the room. He dressed quickly, still marveling at the way the fabric of his clothes seemed to adjust to his body temperature, keeping him perfectly comfortable. Azora and Leah were waiting for him in a grand hall, their expressions serene yet expectant. Today, Azora began, "We will begin your integration into our society." Paul frowned. Integration. Zurak never mentioned anything about integration. What exactly does that mean? Leah stepped forward, her eyes soft and kind. It means that you must learn our ways, Paul. You are no longer just a visitor here. As Zorak's heir, you are now a part of our world, and with that comes certain responsibilities. Responsibilities, Paul echoed, a knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. Yes, Azora confirmed, but do not worry. We will guide you every step of the way. They led him to a smaller, more intimate chamber, where the walls seemed to pulse with a gentle, living energy. In the center of the room was a circular platform surrounded by floating holographic symbols. This is the ritual of integration, Azora explained. It is a sacred ceremony that will bind you to our world, allowing you to fully immerse yourself in our culture and society. Paul hesitated. And if I don't want to go through with it? Azora's eyes softened. You have a choice, of course. But understand that without this ritual, you'll always remain an outsider. You will never fully belong. Leah stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Paul's arm. We will be with you the entire time, Paul. You are not alone in this. Taking a deep breath, Paul nodded. All right, let's do this. Azora smiled, a hint of pride in her eyes. Very well. Step onto the platform. As Paul did so, the holographic symbols began to glow, swirling around him in a mesmerizing dance of light. He felt a tingling sensation spread through his body, starting at his feet and working its way up to his head. The air seemed to hum with energy, and for a moment, Paul felt as though he were floating. Close your eyes, Leah instructed, her voice gentle yet firm. And focus on the energy around you. Let it guide you. Paul did as she said, and as he closed his eyes, he felt the energy intensify, enveloping him like a warm, protective blanket. It was as if the very essence of the planet was reaching out to him, welcoming him into its embrace. Images began to flood his mind, flashes of alien landscapes, strange creatures, and unfamiliar customs. He saw himself standing beside Azora and Leah, dressed in ceremonial robes, addressing a crowd of aliens who looked up to him with respect and admiration. He saw himself mastering the use of alien technology, his hands moving with confidence and precision, and he saw himself standing in the center of a great hall, surrounded by holographic maps of the galaxy, strategizing with Azora and Leah on how to protect their world from unseen threats. When Paul finally opened his eyes, he felt different, stronger, more connected to the world around him. The tingling sensation had faded, leaving behind a sense of peace and clarity. Welcome, Azora said softly, her voice filled with warmth and acceptance. You are now one of us. Leah smiled, her eyes shining with pride. We knew you could do it, Paul. Paul stepped off the platform, his mind still reeling from the experience. What just happened? You have been integrated, Azora explained. The ritual has bonded you to our world, allowing you to fully understand and embrace our customs, our technology, and our way of life. Paul blinked, trying to process everything. And what happens now? Now, Leia said with a smile, we teach you everything you need to know about being a part of our society. And when you are ready, we will show you the true purpose of Zorak's research. Paul nodded, determination hardening his resolve. He had come this far, there was no turning back now. He was ready to embrace this new life, to learn everything he could, and to honor Zorak's legacy. But as he followed Azora and Leia out of the chamber, one question lingered in the back of his mind. What exactly had Zorak been working on, and why had he chosen Paul to continue his work? The answers, Paul knew, would change everything, both for him and for the world he had just become a part of, the hidden laboratory. Over the next few days, Paul's life on Proxima B fell into a routine, though nothing about it was ordinary. Azora and Leia proved to be patient teachers, guiding him through the intricacies of their culture and technology. Paul quickly realized that the integration ritual had indeed bonded him to this world. He understood their language instinctively now, could operate their devices as if he'd been born here, and even began to think in ways that aligned more with their society. Yet, despite his progress, the mystery of Zorak's research loomed large in his mind. Azora and Leia had been vague whenever he asked about it, deflecting his inquiries with promises that he wasn't ready yet. But Paul's curiosity only grew stronger. He knew he needed to understand what Zorak had been working on, and why it was so important that Paul, of all people, had been chosen to inherit it. Finally, one evening, as they were enjoying a meal of delicately spiced alien fruits and vegetables in a floating garden, Paul couldn't hold back any longer. Azora, Leia, he began, setting down his fork, I need to know what Zorak was working on. You keep saying I'm not ready, but how can I be if you don't tell me anything? Azora exchanged a glance with Leia, who nodded slightly. With a sigh, Azora leaned forward, her expression serious. Very well, Paul. You've proven your commitment to our world. Tomorrow, we will show you. Paul's heart leaped in his chest, a mix of excitement and apprehension. Thank you. I appreciate your trust. The next morning, they led him deep into the heart of the city, to a part Paul had never seen before. The buildings here were older, their crystalline structures weathered by time, but still beautiful in their own way. They arrived at a tall, imposing tower that seemed to hum with an energy Paul could feel in his bones. This is Zorak's hidden laboratory, Leia explained as they approached the entrance. Few know of its existence, and fewer still have ever entered. Paul glanced at them, noticing the solemn expressions on their faces. This was clearly a place of great importance and great secrets. The door slid open with a whisper, revealing a long, dimly lit corridor that led deep underground. Paul followed Azora and Leia into the bowels of the tower, the air growing cooler and more charged with every step. The walls were lined with strange, glowing symbols that Paul recognized from the integration ritual, but their meaning eluded him. Finally, they reached a large, circular chamber at the end of the corridor. In the center of the room stood a massive, spherical device, its surface covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as Paul watched. The air around it crackled with energy, and Paul could feel the hairs on his arms stand on end. This, Azora said quietly, is Zorak's greatest creation, the quantum nexus. Paul approached the device cautiously, feeling a strange pull toward it. What does it do? Leia stepped beside him, her voice soft. The quantum nexus is a gateway, Paul, a bridge between dimensions, between realities. Paul's mind struggled to grasp the concept. You mean alternate realities? Parallel universes? Precisely, Azora confirmed. Zorak believed that by accessing these alternate realities, we could gain knowledge and technology far beyond anything we have now. He was working to stabilize the nexus, to make it safe for exploration, but his work was incomplete when he passed. Paul's gaze shifted between the nexus and the two women. And you want me to finish it? Yes, Leia said, her eyes full of hope. Zorak chose you because he believed in your potential, Paul. He believed that your unique perspective as a human could unlock the final pieces of the puzzle. Paul felt a weight settle on his shoulders. The implications were staggering. If the Nexus could truly open doors to other realities, the possibilities were endless. But so were the risks. What if something goes wrong? What if we open a door to something we can't control? Azora placed a reassuring hand on his arm. That is why we must proceed carefully. Zorak's notes are all here, but they are encoded. We need your help to decipher them and to finish what he started. Paul took a deep breath, the enormity of the task before him sinking in. I'll do it. I'll help you complete the Nexus. Lia's face broke into a relieved smile. Thank you, Paul. Together, we can honor Zorak's legacy and unlock the secrets of the universe. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Paul immersed himself in Zorak's notes, which were written in a complex code that blended alien symbols with mathematical formulas that made his head spin. But with Azora and Lia's guidance, he began to make progress, slowly unraveling the mysteries of the Nexus. The work was exhausting, both mentally and physically, but Paul was driven by a sense of purpose he had never felt before. This was why Zorak had chosen him, why he had been brought to this world, and he was determined not to let him down. As they worked, Paul grew closer to Azora and Lia. What had begun as a formal relationship gradually became something more personal, more intimate. He found himself looking forward to their shared meals, their quiet conversations late into the night, and the way they each brought out different sides of him. Azora's strength and determination, Lia's kindness and compassion. Despite the alien nature of their world, Paul felt a sense of belonging he had never known on Earth. But as they neared the completion of the Nexus, Paul couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The device thrummed with power, more than he thought it should, and the symbols on its surface seemed to pulse with an intensity that made him uneasy. He mentioned his concerns to Azora and Lia, but they reassured him that everything was proceeding as it should. Then one night, as Paul was going over the final equations, he noticed something, a small, almost imperceptible flaw in the calculations. It was a tiny error, one that Zorak had likely overlooked in his haste. But if left uncorrected, it could destabilize the entire Nexus, causing it to implode the moment it was activated. Paul's heart raced as he realized the implications. He had to fix it, and he had to do it now, before it was too late. He rushed to the Nexus, where Azora and Lia were making final adjustments. "Wait," he shouted, skidding to a stop in front of them. "There's a mistake in the equations. If we activate the Nexus now, it could collapse in on itself." Azora and Lia froze, their eyes widening in shock. "Are you certain?" Azora asked, her voice tight with concern. Paul nodded, his hands shaking as he showed them the flaw. "I'm sure. We need to correct this before we do anything else." Lia's face went pale as she examined the equations. "He's right, Azora. This could have been catastrophic." Azora clenched her fists, anger flashing in her eyes. Zorak must have been too close to see it. We were so focused on finishing his work, we missed it too. Paul felt a wave of relief as they acknowledged the mistake. "It's not too late. We can fix this." And so, they went back to work, carefully recalculating the equations and making the necessary adjustments. It was slow, painstaking work, but Paul knew it was worth it. Finally, after what felt like hours, the Nexus was ready. Azora and Lia stood beside him as he prepared to activate the device, their expressions a mix of anticipation and apprehension. "Are you ready?" Paul asked, his finger hovering over the control panel. "As ready as we'll ever be," Azora replied, her voice steady. Paul took a deep breath and pressed the button. The Nexus hummed to life, the symbols on its surface glowing with a brilliant, otherworldly light. The air around them crackled with energy as the device began to spin faster and faster until it became a blur of motion. Paul held his breath, waiting for something to go wrong. But to his relief, the Nexus stabilized, the energy around it condensing into a single focused beam that shot out into the chamber, creating a swirling vortex of light. "It's working," Leia whispered, her voice filled with awe. Paul could hardly believe it. They had done it. They had completed the Nexus. But as he stared into the vortex, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. What lay on the other side of that gateway? What challenges and dangers awaited them? He didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't facing it alone. With Azora and Leia by his side, he was ready to step into the unknown, to explore the infinite possibilities that lay beyond the quantum nexus. And as they took their first steps toward the gateway, Paul felt a sense of excitement and wonder that he hadn't felt in years. The future was uncertain, but it was also filled with hope, and that was enough for him. A glimpse beyond the veil. The swirling vortex of light before them was mesmerizing, casting an ethereal glow across the chamber. Paul, Azora, and Leia stood at the threshold of the unknown, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. The quantum nexus, now fully operational, pulsed with a rhythmic energy that resonated deep within Paul's bones. For a moment, none of them moved. The reality of what they had accomplished hung in the air, heavy and surreal. Paul's mind raced with possibilities. What if they had just opened a door to an alternate reality where humanity had taken a different path? What if they encountered versions of themselves, living out entirely different lives? Azora was the first to break the silence. "We must proceed with caution," she said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "This gateway could lead to countless realities, some of which may be hostile or dangerous. We cannot afford to be reckless." Leia nodded in agreement. "We should send a probe through first, something small that can gather data and transmit it back. That way, we'll know what we're dealing with." Paul exhaled, grateful for their level-headedness. "I agree. We've come too far to make a mistake now." Together, they quickly set to work, preparing a small drone equipped with sensors and cameras. The device was sleek and compact, designed for reconnaissance in unknown environments. As they programmed its parameters, Paul couldn't help but marvel at the technology at his fingertips, technology that was both alien and yet, somehow, felt familiar. With the drone ready, they approached the Nexus once more. The vortex seemed to beckon them, its swirling patterns hypnotic and otherworldly. Paul's hand hovered over the control panel, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "Here goes nothing," he muttered, and with a swift motion, he sent the drone into the vortex. The room was filled with a tense silence as the drone vanished into the swirling light. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then the screens on the nearby console flickered to life, displaying a cascade of data as the drone began transmitting from the other side. Azora, Leia, and Paul crowded around the console, their eyes fixed on the screens. The images were initially distorted, as if the drone were passing through a turbulent sea of energy. But gradually the visuals stabilized, revealing a world unlike anything Paul had ever seen. The drone had emerged in what appeared to be a vast, open landscape, bathed in the soft glow of a strange, luminescent sky. The terrain was covered in lush, alien vegetation, trees with leaves that shimmered like crystals, flowers that pulsed with bioluminescent light, and a river of liquid silver that wound through the landscape like a ribbon of mercury. "Unbelievable," Paul whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. "It's beautiful." Azora and Leia were equally entranced by the sight. "This world, it's teeming with life," Leia murmured. "But it's unlike any ecosystem we've ever encountered." As the drone continued to explore, it transmitted more data back to the console: atmospheric readings, radiation levels, magnetic fields, all of which indicated that the environment was stable and relatively safe. Yet there was something odd about the readings, something Paul couldn't quite put his finger on. "There's a slight anomaly here," he said, pointing to a section of the data. "The gravitational field is slightly weaker than it should be, and the energy readings, they're fluctuating, as if there's some kind of interference." Azora frowned, studying the data closely. It could be a natural phenomenon of this world, or it could be something else, something we haven't accounted for. Should we pull the drone back? Leia asked, concern creeping into her voice. Paul hesitated, torn between caution and curiosity. Let's give it a little more time, he decided. We need to gather as much information as we can. The drone continued its journey, moving deeper into the avian landscape. As it crested a hill, the cameras captured something that made Paul's heart skip a beat. Structures, or what looked like the remnants of a civilization, half buried in the ground. Are those buildings? Leia asked, leaning closer to the screen. Or what's left of them? Azora added, her tone somber. The drone descended toward the ruins, revealing more details. The structures were ancient, weathered by time and overgrown with a strange vegetation. But there was no mistaking their artificial nature. Walls of smooth, black stone, intricately carved pillars, and the remnants of what looked like a massive gate, shattered and lying in pieces. This world was once inhabited, Paul said, a sense of awe and sadness filling him. But by whom? And what happened to them? As the drone approached the gate, it suddenly jerked to a halt, its sensors going haywire. The data on the consoles spiked wildly, and the visual feed became distorted once again. What's happening? Leia asked, her voice rising in alarm. Something's interfering with the drone, Paul replied, frantically trying to regain control. But the interference only grew stronger, and the drone's feed became a chaotic jumble of colors and noise. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the interference stopped. The screen went black, and all data transmission ceased. We've lost it, Azora said, her voice flat with shock. The drone, it's gone. Paul's mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. Whatever's out there, it's not just a natural phenomenon. Something, or someone, took down our drone. The chamber fell into a heavy silence as the three of them grappled with the implications. The Nexus had opened a gateway to another world, one filled with beauty and mystery, but also with danger. What do we do now? Leia asked, her eyes filled with uncertainty. Paul clenched his fists, determination hardening in his chest. We need to go through ourselves. We need to find out what's on the other side, what happened to that civilization, and what destroyed our drone. If we don't, we'll never know if we've opened a door to something we can't control. Azora nodded, her expression resolute. Paul is right. We can't turn back now. We need to understand what we're dealing with. But we must be prepared, Leia added. We don't know what we'll find, and we can't afford to be caught off guard. They spent the rest of the day preparing for the journey. They equipped themselves with protective suits, advanced weapons, and devices that could shield them from the interference that had taken down the drone. Paul felt a strange mix of excitement and fear as they made their final checks, the reality of what they were about to do sinking in. As they stood before the Nexus once more, ready to step into the unknown, Paul felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment of truth. They were about to venture into a world no human had ever seen, to face whatever challenges awaited them on the other side. With a deep breath, Paul took the first step into the vortex, followed closely by Azora and Leia. The world around him dissolved into a blur of light and sound, a sensation of being pulled through a tunnel of pure energy. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, the sensation stopped. Paul found himself standing on solid ground, his eyes adjusting to the soft, alien light of the new world. Azora and Leia were beside him, their expressions filled with the same mix of awe and trepidation. Before them stretched the landscape they had seen through the drone's eyes, lush vegetation, the shimmering sky, and the ruins of an ancient civilization. But there was something else too, a presence, a feeling of being watched, that sent a shiver down Paul's spine. Stay alert, Azora whispered, her hand resting on the weapon at her side. We're not alone here. Paul nodded, his senses on high alert. They had stepped through the quantum nexus, and now there was no turning back. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. As they moved deeper into the alien landscape, Paul couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn towards something powerful and ancient, waiting for them in the shadows of the ruins. And as they approached the shattered gate, Paul knew they were about to uncover secrets that could change their understanding of the universe forever. You said, echoes of the forgotten. The ruins loomed before them, silent sentinels of a lost civilization. The massive gate, shattered and half buried in the alien soil, seemed to whisper of forgotten histories, of a time when this world had thrived with life and knowledge. Paul, Azora, and Leia stood at the threshold, their hearts heavy with the weight of the unknown. Paul took a cautious step forward, his senses on high alert. The air was thick with an energy that hummed just below the surface, a presence that was both elusive and overwhelming. It was as if the very ground beneath their feet held memories of what had once been, a civilization advanced beyond their understanding, now reduced to ruins. "Do you feel that?" Leia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes darted around the ruins, searching for something she couldn't quite name. Paul nodded, his grip tightening on the advanced weapons strapped to his side. It's like the air itself is alive with something. It's hard to explain. Azora, ever the pragmatist, moved forward with measured steps. "We must stay focused. Whatever happened here, we need to uncover it carefully. Let's start by examining the structures and see if we can find any clues." The trio began their exploration, moving through the ruins with a mix of reverence and caution. The structures were awe-inspiring in their design, smooth, black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, intricate carvings that depicted scenes of life and technology far beyond human comprehension. Paul ran his fingers over one of the carvings, tracing the delicate lines. The image depicted figures, tall, elegant beings that were clearly not human, engaged in activities that ranged from constructing massive machines to what appeared to be rituals of some kind. But there was something strange about the carvings. The figures seemed to be fading into the stone, as if they were being erased from existence. These people, or whatever they had technology far beyond ours, Paul murmured, his eyes scanning the images. But something happened, something catastrophic. Azora joined him, her eyes narrowing as she studied the carvings. It's almost as if they were trying to preserve their knowledge, to leave behind a record of what they were. But something interfered. Leia, who had been examining another part of the ruins, called out to them, "Over here, I think I found something." Paul and Azora hurried over to where Leia was standing. She was kneeling beside what looked like a control panel, embedded in the ground and covered in dust. The panel was ancient, its surface worn smooth by time, but it was clearly a piece of advanced technology. "It looks like it's part of a larger system," Leia said, brushing away the dirt. "Maybe it was connected to whatever powered this city, or even the entire planet." Paul crouched beside her, examining the panel closely. "If we can get this working, it might give us some answers, but we'll need to figure out how to power it up." Azora, always the strategist, scanned the surroundings. "We should search the area for any power sources or other panels that might be part of the same network. If we can find something, we might be able to activate this." They spread out, combing through the ruins with a newfound sense of purpose. As they searched, the feeling of being watched grew stronger, a prickling sensation at the back of Paul's neck that refused to go away. But no matter how hard he looked, there was no sign of anyone or anything else in the area. After what felt like hours, Paul stumbled upon something buried beneath a pile of rubble, a large crystalline structure that pulsed faintly with energy. It was connected to several thick cables that snaked out in different directions, disappearing into the ground and walls of the ruins. "I think I found a power source," he called out, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Azora and Leia rushed over, their faces lighting up with hope as they saw the crystalline structure. "This could be exactly what we need," Azora said, already examining the connections. "If we can reroute some of this energy, we might be able to power up the panel." Working together, they carefully began to reroute the energy, using the tools they had brought with them. It was slow, meticulous work, and Paul couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out, that they were racing against an unseen force. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the crystalline structure pulsed brightly, and a hum of energy coursed through the cables. The ground beneath them vibrated slightly, and the control panel that Leah had found lit up with a soft green glow. "It's working," Leah whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. Azora wasted no time, immediately beginning to interface with the panel. The ancient technology responded to her touch, displaying lines of data and symbols that were difficult to interpret. But Azora's sharp mind worked quickly, decoding the information and piecing together the puzzle. "This system, it's some kind of database," she said, her voice filled with awe. "It contains records, historical data, scientific knowledge, even personal logs from the people who lived here." Paul leaned over her shoulder, his heart pounding. "Can you access the data? Find out what happened to them?" Azora nodded, her fingers flying over the controls. "I'm trying, but it's fragmented. Whatever happened here disrupted the entire system. It's like trying to read a book with half the pages torn out." As Azora worked, the air around them seemed to grow heavier, the energy in the ruins pulsing with a rhythm that matched the beating of Paul's heart. He glanced around nervously, half expecting something to emerge from the shadows. Finally, Azora managed to access a section of the data. A holographic display flickered to life above the panel, showing a series of images and text in a language none of them recognized. But the images told a story that needed no translation. They saw the tall, elegant beings from the carvings, living in harmony with their world, building incredible machines, and harnessing energy from the very fabric of reality. But then something changed. The images grew darker, more chaotic, figures fleeing from unseen threats, machines breaking down, and the land itself becoming twisted and corrupted. "This is what happened to them," Leia said, her voice trembling. They unleashed something they couldn't control." The final images were the most chilling. The beings, now desperate and broken, gathered around a massive structure, a gateway, similar to the quantum nexus they had created. They were trying to escape, to flee to another reality. But the gateway malfunctioned, and the last image showed the entire civilization being consumed by a wave of energy, their forms dissolving into nothingness. They tried to use the nexus to escape, but it failed, Azora said, her voice hollow. Whatever they unleashed, it destroyed them completely. Paul felt a cold dread settle in his chest. "And now we've opened that same gateway. We've opened the door to whatever it was that destroyed them." The chamber was filled with a tense silence as they absorbed the gravity of their situation. They had unlocked the secrets of a lost civilization, but in doing so, they had also potentially unleashed the same destructive force that had wiped them out. "We need to shut it down," Leah said urgently. "We need to close the nexus before it's too late." But as they turned to leave, the ground beneath them shook violently, and a deafening roar filled the air. The energy from the crystalline structure surged, sending sparks flying, and the ruins began to crumble around them. "Run," Paul shouted, grabbing Azora and Leah as they sprinted toward the nexus. The ground cracked and split open behind them, and the air was filled with the sound of collapsing stone and the screeching of energy tearing through the fabric of reality. They reached the nexus just as the vortex began to destabilize, its swirling patterns becoming erratic and wild. Azora quickly accessed the controls, trying to initiate the shutdown sequence. But before she could complete the process, a blinding flash of light erupted from the nexus, and the world around them dissolved into chaos. Paul felt himself being pulled in every direction at once, the sensation of being torn apart and reassembled in the blink of an eye. And then, just as suddenly, it was over. The light faded, and Paul found himself lying on the ground, gasping for breath. The ruins were gone, replaced by a vast, empty void that stretched out in all directions. Azora and Leah were beside him, dazed but alive. They had made it through the collapse, but they were no longer in the world of the ruins. They were somewhere else, somewhere outside of reality as they knew it. "We were still here," Leia said, her voice shaky. "But where is here?" Paul looked around, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. The void was infinite, a place where time and space seemed to have no meaning. "We're in the Nexus," Azora whispered, her eyes wide with realization. "We've been pulled into the gateway itself." As the reality of their situation set in, Paul knew they were trapped in a place that defied all logic and understanding. They had uncovered the secrets of a lost civilization, but in doing so, they had also crossed a threshold from which there might be no return. And somewhere in the depths of the void, something stirred, something ancient and powerful, awakened by their presence. The awakening. The void around them pulsed with an unsettling rhythm, like the heartbeat of a monstrous creature lying just beneath the surface. Paul, Azora, and Leia stood in silence, the vast emptiness of the Nexus surrounding them. It was a place beyond time and space, where the usual rules of reality no longer applied. Paul's breath came in shallow gasps as he tried to process their situation. They were trapped in the very gateway they had opened, in a realm that was not meant for living beings. The fear that had been gnawing at him since they first arrived at the ruins now threatened to overwhelm him. "We need to stay calm," Azora said, her voice steady but laced with tension. "Panicking won't get us out of here. We need to figure out what this place is and how to get back." Leia's eyes were wide with fear, but she nodded, trying to control her trembling hands. "This place, it's like we're outside of reality itself. But how do we navigate something that defies all logic?" Azora's analytical mind was already at work, her eyes scanning the void for any signs of stability. The Nexus was designed to bridge different dimensions, but something went wrong. The civilization that created it was destroyed by whatever they unleashed. "We need to find a way to stabilize the gateway and reverse whatever is happening." Paul nodded, though the sheer scale of what they were dealing with made his head spin. But what was it that destroyed them? Is it still here? As if in response to his question, the void around them began to shift. The darkness seemed to ripple, waves of energy distorting the space around them. Paul felt the hair on the back of his neck stand on end, an instinctive reaction to the presence of something dangerous, something alive. And then, from the depths of the void, it appeared. At first, it was just a shadow, an indistinct form that moved with unnatural grace. But as it drew closer, it took shape, a massive, amorphous entity, its surface rippling with strange, shifting patterns. It had no discernible features, no eyes or mouth, but Paul could feel its attention focused on them, a malevolent awareness that made his blood run cold. Leia gasped, taking a step back. "What is that?" Azora's voice was grim. "It's what's left of them, the beings who created the Nexus. Their civilization was destroyed, but this is what remains. They've become something else, something beyond our understanding." The entity hovered before them, its form constantly shifting, as if it were made of the same energy that pulsed through the void. Paul could feel its presence pressing down on him, a suffocating force that threatened to crush him under its weight. "We need to communicate with it," Azora said, her eyes locked on the entity. "If it's the last remnant of the civilization, it might know how to reverse what's happening." Paul wasn't sure how they were supposed to communicate with something so alien, but he trusted Azora's judgment. They had no other options. Azora stepped forward, raising her hand in what she hoped was a gesture of peace. "We are not your enemies," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We seek to understand what happened to your world and to prevent the same fate from befalling ours." The entity's surface shimmered, its patterns growing more chaotic. Paul felt a wave of pressure hit him, a sensation like 1,000 voices whispering in his mind, all speaking at once in a language he couldn't understand. Azora winced, but she held her ground. "We opened the Nexus by mistake, and were trying to close it, but we need your help. Tell us how to undo what's been done." For a moment, it seemed as if the entity might respond, its shifting form slowing as if considering her words. But then, the whispers in Paul's mind grew louder, more insistent, until they were a deafening roar that threatened to tear his sanity apart. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head in agony. "Azora, it's too much. I can't." But before he could finish, the pressure suddenly lifted, and the whispers faded into silence. Paul gasped for air, his vision swimming as he tried to regain his bearings. Azora had fallen to one knee, her face pale and strained. It's trying to communicate, but it's too much for us to handle. We need to find another way." Leah, who had been standing back in shock, suddenly spoke up. Maybe we're not meant to understand it with our minds alone. This place, this entity, it's beyond our comprehension. But what if we try to reach it in a different way?" Azora looked up at her, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Leah hesitated, searching for the right words. "I don't know exactly. But if this entity is what's left of the civilization that created the Nexus, then it's more than just energy or matter. It's consciousness, memory, emotion, all mixed together. Maybe we need to connect with it on that level." Paul didn't fully understand what Leah was suggesting, but he knew they were running out of time. The entity was growing more agitated, its form pulsing with increasing intensity. Whatever they were going to do, they had to do it quickly. Azora nodded, her expression resolute. "It's worth a try. We'll focus on our emotions, our intent. Let it know that we're here to help, not to harm." The three of them closed their eyes, reaching out with their thoughts, their feelings. Paul focused on the determination that had brought them this far, the desire to protect their world and to uncover the truth. He poured all of his hope, his fear, his will into that connection, hoping that the entity would understand. For a moment, nothing happened. The void remained silent, the entity's form still swirling with chaotic energy. But then, slowly, the patterns began to change. The chaotic ripples smoothed out, becoming more harmonious, more coherent. Paul felt a presence in his mind, but this time it was different. The whispers were still there, but they were softer, more focused. He could almost make out words, fragments of thoughts and memories that weren't his own. And then a single image flashed in his mind, an image of the Nexus, but whole and intact, its power contained and controlled. He saw the ancient beings, their forms bright and clear, working together to create something beautiful, something that could connect worlds without destroying them. But then the image darkened, and he saw the moment when it all went wrong. The power became too much to control, and the gateway began to collapse, tearing their world apart. The beings tried to stop it, but it was too late. Their civilization was consumed by the very technology they had created, leaving behind only echoes in the void. Paul's heart ached as he realized what had happened. They hadn't just unleashed a destructive force, they had unleashed themselves. The energy of the Nexus had absorbed their consciousness, their very essence, turning them into the entity that now stood before him. But there was still hope. The entity was showing them the way, guiding them to the solution. They could still stabilize the Nexus, but they needed to act quickly before the energy consumed them as well. Paul opened his eyes, meeting Azora's gaze. "We need to access the Nexus's core and stabilize it. The entity is guiding us." Azora nodded, her face set with determination. "Let's do it." They moved quickly, following the guidance of the entity as it led them through the void. The Nexus's core was a massive structure, glowing with a pulsing light that seemed to be the source of the energy that filled the void. Azora began working on the controls, her fingers flying over the ancient interface as she accessed the core's systems. Leah and Paul stood by her side, ready to assist in any way they could. "It's a delicate process," Azora said, her voice tense. "If we make a mistake, we could destabilize the entire structure and end up like the civilization that created it." Back at the base camp, the debriefing took hours. Paul, Azora, and Leah recounted every detail of their experience, from the initial discovery of the Nexus to their final confrontation with the entity. The scientists and officials who listened were spellbound, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. "This is unprecedented," one of the senior scientists murmured, shaking his head. "A living remnant of an ancient civilization, and you communicated with it. The implications are staggering." Dr. Aiden nodded, his expression serious. "We'll need to handle this information carefully. The world needs to know, but we also need to consider the potential risks. If the Nexus can be reactivated, we must ensure it's done safely." Paul felt a sense of responsibility weighing on him. They had glimpsed the dangers of tampering with forces beyond their understanding, but they had also seen the potential for growth and connection. As the debriefing continued, discussions turned to what their next steps would be. Some advocated for further exploration of the ruins to uncover more of the ancient civilization's secrets. Others cautioned against it, fearing what might be unleashed. Azora spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "We need to approach this with respect. The civilization that created the Nexus was destroyed by its own power. We need to learn from their mistakes, not repeat them." Her words resonated with the group, and after much debate, it was agreed that any future exploration would be conducted with extreme caution, under strict oversight. The Nexus would be monitored, its power contained to prevent any further destabilization. As the meeting concluded, Paul felt a sense of closure. They had faced an incredible challenge and had come out stronger for it. But more than that, they had gained a deeper understanding of their place in the universe. Later that evening, as the base camp quieted down, Paul found himself standing outside, gazing up at the night sky. The stars seemed closer now, more familiar. He thought of the ancient beings whose civilization had been lost, their essence now part of the Nexus. They had reached for the stars, just as humanity was doing now. Leah joined him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Do you think we'll ever find out more about them? About who they were, what they were like?" Paul smiled softly. "Maybe, but I think what's more important is what we do with what we've learned. We're not alone in the universe, and we never have been. There's so much out there waiting for us, so many possibilities." Azora approached, her presence a steadying force. "And we have a responsibility to explore those possibilities wisely, to learn to grow, but also to respect the unknown." The three of them stood together, a silent understanding passing between them. They had been through something extraordinary, something that had changed them in ways they were only beginning to understand. As they stood beneath the stars, Paul felt a renewed sense of purpose. The universe was vast, filled with wonders and dangers alike, but they were ready to face whatever came next, armed with the knowledge they had gained and the connections they had forged. In the distance, the ruins of the Nexus stood as a silent sentinel, a reminder of the past and a beacon for the future. Humanity had taken its first steps into a larger world, and there was no turning back. As the night deepened, Paul, Azora, and Leah made their way back to the camp, ready to rest and prepare for the challenges ahead. They had uncovered the secrets of a lost civilization, but their journey was far from over. The dawn of a new era was upon them, and they were determined to face it with open minds and hopeful hearts. The universe awaited, and they were ready to meet it head-on. With that thought in mind, Paul felt a sense of peace. Whatever the future held, they would face it together, guided by the lessons of the past and the promise of the stars. And as the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, Paul knew that they had only just begun to scratch the surface of what lay beyond. The adventure had just begun.